Let's look at the funk.
Could you stop playing with that radio, Lord? I'm trying to get to sleep. Could you stop playing with that radio, Lord? I'm trying to get to sleep. Could you stop? Could you stop? I'm trying to get to.
Look, I'm sure you're dealing with a lot at the moment. Relationship issues, college classes, and the crippling reality that property is damn near impossible to own in the United States. Or even worse, a long reading list that has been sitting there for months. Stuff you've wanted to check out, but the amount of chapters you would have to go through in order to catch up is ridiculous. Now, as someone who's read around 5,000 chapters of material in the last 2 to 3 months, I'm tempted to tell you to get off whatever social media has crippled your attention span, but instead I'll give you 7 ongoing manga that are relatively new that I think are worth keeping an eye on. That way you have some momentum before you get into some of the more daunting tasks. Now, you all know how much I love Inio Asano's manga. If you didn't know, I'm the Masked Man. Hope your 2024 has been full of blessings and self-realization. Any screenshots of tweets I've made are photoshopped and not real. Mujina Into the Deep is Asano's new manga, far more action-packed than any of his previous ones, especially from the jump. There are people in this story that have given up their human rights willingly and find work as hitmen. These individuals are called Mujinas, and this is the case of the female lead Ubame. We follow her life as well as the male lead called Terumi, a man struggling with his relationship with his wife and son, and the two end up running into each other, although that is a bit of an understatement considering it was another Mujina trying to kill Ubame that led to them meeting. Terumi is interested since his friend was killed by Mujina years ago and is looking for answers, hence why he wants to stick around Ubame. It's a little odd again seeing action with Asano, but he still keeps true to his strengths of portraying humans trying to find their place in a weird and twisted society. Brutal, apathetic, more so brutal in its apathy, if you will, and with their priorities backwards, often delving into very sensitive and mature topics, so once again, heads up. He adds an eccentric twist to what is a very real feeling of isolation and hopelessness that is made apparent from the beginning of this story, although this isn't the only story in which he's delved into that. Asano's stories tend to take their time admittedly, but every time he leaves me in tears once he enters the second half and reaches the climax of his stories, and I hope he's able to go 4 for 4. The next manga on the list has very few chapters out called Astro Baby. A disease has broken out that turns humans into cannibals. Our main character, when introduced, is a snot-nosed kid that no one believes when he says he saw a weird black slime, until a doctor shows up saying she believes what he is saying. Time passes and the kid grows up and decides to become a trained soldier, his motivation being his love for the doctor. If this is enough for you to be interested, then I suggest you skip to the next segment I have timestamped because, well, spoilers. He actually confesses and proposes to the doctor, but it turns out she's pregnant, and when she's about to give birth, a meteor crashes down into the city, and the black slime the main character talked about back when he was a kid infects the female doctor, thus turning her into a cannibal. However, because of the whole incident, the baby has supernatural powers and makes a deal with the main character that he will help him if he is helped first. The doctor escapes after the confrontation, but then the hospital is surrounded by troops given orders to kill anyone that was near the site. This is a very strong start to a manga, and I'm really interested to see where all of this goes, as I think at its best it can be something comparable to Parasite if it goes about the dynamic between the alien baby and the main character in a similar way, but realistically, it's too early to make any good predictions, and I might have condemned it with that Parasite one, so my apologies. Here is another manga I'm excited for given the track record of the author. Made by the same person who created Kasane, this manga is called Steel of the Celestial Shadows. A samurai finds himself incapable of using a sword. The reason why will be revealed a few chapters later, but because of his predicament he can't find any work and is the laughingstock of the town. Also, metal bends and can't touch him, so he can't be harmed by the sword either, which isn't really a negative unless it's from his perspective, which again the story delves into. His life, however, is changed forever when he is then married to a beautiful woman that has just as much mystery to be dealt with also. At first, I found myself wondering where this story was going, but now I believe the author was quickly establishing a strong dynamic between Konosuke, the samurai, and his wife Suki that will only be developed more and more as the twists and turns of the story fall into place. If this is anything like Kasane in terms of the drama, then I only expect the momentum to get better and better as the series goes on, while creating a sympathy and a connection to more characters that get involved. It's always nice to see something that gets you invested into the characters early on, and not just the premise, which then loses you quickly after 5 chapters. Now this one might be an indie work, but I still think it's very interesting regardless. Shibatarian is around 20 chapters at this moment and is a horror manga, following Sato, who becomes friends with a kid known as Shibata, a very strange individual in his class. The two end up bonding over movies and even make one of their own for fun, which is shot down in favor of the footage of the middle school soccer team. Angered by the mistreatment, Sato wishes everyone in the world was just like Shibata and that those in the middle school would just die. Shibata disappears, and 5 years later the two are reunited, but this time Shibata plans on making that wish a reality. A movie where he is the villain and Sato is the hero, while he turns more and more people into Shibatas. I'm a sucker for this type of thriller horror. Each manga feels engaging, no wasted time, and it's fine if stories take their time to build things up, but if you want something immediate, then I would highly recommend this. I think the whole thing with Sato having such a great friendship with Shibata, and yet now having to uncover the mysteries behind someone who you question is even really there in the first place, it does have me a little concerned, since if not given the proper explanation, given the subtle buildup throughout the story, essentially, if the reveal behind Shibata's nature is a huge disappointment, this whole manga could end up falling apart. But either ways, I'm really excited to see where this goes. The art occasionally leaves stuff to be desired, but for the most part, I like all the different types of horror this story dives into, specifically body horror, and just the overwhelming sensation that our hero is up against something he can't beat. Unless this takes a horrid left turn, as I said, I'm going to patiently let the chapters build up and read this until the ending. I think I have a confession. I wasn't sure I'd be covering this after the one time a few months ago, but if this continues and gets an anime that blows up, I'll have to title that video From Meme to Mainstream or some BS like that. Kagurabachi, a story about a kid whose father is killed and now he is on a revenge quest after those responsible and is trying to retrieve the legendary swords his dad made. My initial judgments of the story back when it was trending is that it seems like it has potential, and even though now it is largely my verdict still, I think its strengths have become more apparent. The artwork is lovely, just to get that out of the way, especially when the elements of horror tapped into. I noticed that was the same for JJK in regards to my favorite panels, it being the big action shots or those moments where the author delved into a more dark and creepy atmosphere, although two very different aesthetics in that presentation. The main character, Chihiro, has a lot of room to work with, but what I'm really keeping an eye out for regarding this series is what it does with the antagonist, especially the main antagonist down the line, since that tends to have a big impact on my investment into these types of manga. Still, I think the action up to this point has been top-notch, and will only get better from here as the art style evolves, as well as the current cast of characters we have been introduced to all seem to have neat and standout personalities, but once again, when it comes to these type of manga, they tend to make very strong first impressions, but then don't continue to expand upon these characters, which often leads to largely disappointing casts. Which, once again, if a story chooses to focus on only specific characters, that's fine, but don't bait me into thinking you're going to delve into characters you do nothing with. Regardless, if you're looking for an action series, then here you go, but if you want something more unique, I honestly do think this one still needs some more time to develop its own identity. Next up on the menu we have Witch Enforcer. This isn't my personal cup of tea entirely, at least not yet. Witches come from an advanced society on the moon. In fact, it's so perfect that it causes massive boredom, so some of them break the rules by coming down to Earth and messing with the humans. In order to stop this, the government hires a witch enforcer to clean up the mess. This story follows one called Natalia and her assistant, is it Eli or is it Ellie? It's 2 L's, so I'm pretty sure it's Ellie, right? Either ways, it's a boy she saved from turning into a monster from a curse of the witch she's actually tracking down. So far, the direction of the story is pretty solid. Natalia as a character has a lot to explore since we know very little about her, but what we are told is done in a bit of an exposition-heavy way, but I'm sure there will be more emotionally impactful moments that are built up to more, especially with her dynamic with, I'm gonna just call him the boy. What I believe to be the main antagonist didn't make the strongest first impression in all honesty, but I'm hoping there is more to explore with that as well. A healthy amount of twists and turns to keep the more relaxed moments from becoming stale or boring is nice, with some nice moments of creativity to where the world can be expanded upon even more as well if it's deciding to go in that direction in a more plot-focused manner. Again, this one isn't my personal favorite out of anything on this list, but I just decided to throw it out there since I'm sure this might intrigue some of you. This final one has been recommended to me many times in the comments, and I do not recall if I covered it in a previous video or not. I feel like I have. But either ways, Wild Strawberry. Plants have taken over Japan and people even erupt into plants, which by the way is visually striking as hell when you read this for the first time. In order to combat this plant apocalypse, they incinerate the plants and anyone infected to prevent this post-apocalyptic setting from getting any worse. Kingo, the main character, lives where it's at its worst with his sister Kayano, and is hiding the fact that she's a host, someone who is, well, infected, if you will, in hopes to preserve her life. The two were actually orphans, and when they were adopted, they were happy to finally have normal lives before the outbreak became severe, but it turns out they were adopted by hosts that were trying to eat them. But that's when Kayano's plant transformation, or Jinka, happened. The difference is, she doesn't eat people for some reason, hence why Kingo has tried protecting her life, since as well it's the only family he's ever had. This is all in vain, sadly, when she is found out, and in an attempt to save her life, he is shot and killed, but then is saved when his sister transfers her Jinka into him to keep him alive. With no will left to live, he is brought to a lab where he is to be incinerated, and he just accepts, but the lab is attacked, which causes him to bloom with his sister's power. There are a lot of stories that have using the enemy's power as your own. Immediately, the first two stories that came into my mind that reminded me of this a little bit in terms of the premise is Kaiju number 8 and Jigan. But still, I think this has a very strong direction and a lot of potential to be an amazing manga. I'm really excited to see what they do with Kingo as a character, what they continue to do with the cast of characters, and just whether or not the story delves into the potential it can have regarding how this has affected the world as a whole. When it always comes to these stories, especially in the early phases, although I think I have a clear idea what this one's trying to do, you always wonder whether or not it's going to get larger and larger with what it tries to go, but I think in doing that it can sometimes really dilute the character moments one can have. So if this goes in the more Jigan type of direction, I think we could see another really interesting main character in Kingo, as I do think his first impressions were really solid. I adore the artwork in this one. I think out of all the manga that I recommended for this video, I do think this one, along with the Asano manga, have my favorite artwork. So once again, this is one definitely worth keeping an eye out on. So there you have it, 7 new manga recommendations for you to check out quickly. That way you don't have to read 100 chapters to catch up on another series. You could stay on top of this one and read it weekly if you want, although personally I do like to let chapters stack up. As always, let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below, as well as if you are new to the channel, subscribe. I also have a Patreon if you want to check out and support the channel. This has been The Masked Man. Hope everyone has a blessed rest of the day, and peace.